Good morning. Good morning. My name is Kubayanas, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you at the 7th Polish Tech Day, our international festival of entrepreneurship, of technology, of innovation, and of networking. And I have an amazing pleasure to welcome our special guests with whom we will start our conference. With us is Kingsley Aikins from Ireland, who is our specialist, our expert on two topics of diaspora engagement and of networking. Kingsley is the CEO and founder of the Networking Institute, and he helps, as a career path, he helps different diasporas all over the world. From Europe, we have Irish, we have Polish, from Africa as well, how to engage and how to reach their maximum potential. Kingsley, these are the words of introduction. I'll not take any more. The floor is yours, and I really hope you will enjoy our conference.
Thank you, Kuba. It's great to be with you all. Thank everybody for joining this morning. Thank you for the introduction. Actually, Kuba, this is the second time that I've spoken to Polish organization. If you remember, somebody once told me that Kuba invites you to speak twice. First, when your career is on the way up, and secondly, when your career is on the way down. So, Kuba, it's great to be back with all my Polish friends. And I really think it's important what we're talking about, the topic, not just the diaspora dimension, but particularly the networking dimension. And I think networking is more important now than ever. And I'll tell you a reason why. There is, I believe, a hidden cost to the COVID pandemic. And it's not talked about, it's not kind of written about very much, but our networks have been shrinking during this period. In the old days, networks used to churn and change a lot, and we were always replacing old relationships with new relationships. But now we're not developing those new relationships. And I think that during this COVID time, we have diverted attention away from our weak connections all out there and spent an awful lot of time with just a close bond of people, which is mostly family and some small number of friends. Maybe that the total of that is only like 5 to 10. And that's a challenge because that causes some real challenges for us as individuals and for companies. There was some fascinating research in the last few weeks came out of Yale University. A woman called Marissa King, she wrote a book called Social Chemistry. And what she said was that during COVID, men's networks have decreased by 30% and women's networks haven't decreased at all. And she explained that. And she said, the reason is that men like to do things with other men. They like to, go to the pub and have a pint. They like to, go to a football game or play golf or go fishing or hiking or riding bicycles, whatever it is. Whereas women prefer actually to spend time chatting and talking to each other and connecting kind of on an emotional sort of level. So that's a sort of fascinating. I don't know how true that is for everybody on this call this morning. It's certainly true in my house. I know when my friend calls me and says, do you want a drink? I'll say, I'll see you in the pub in 10 minutes. And when somebody calls my wife and says, do you want to have a drink? She'll have a chat for an hour and then they'll go and have a drink. But there are implications for individuals and for businesses in what's happening now because of this shrinkage of our networks, because networks are critically important. They're important for business development. So business development is not happening at the pace it used to happen. It's the way you find your next job. That's also a challenge. It's the way you make kind of career progress. In fact, there'll be an interesting question now because companies, I think many of them will end up with a hybrid situation where you'll be partly working from home, partly working in the office. But there's also that challenge, the fact that sometimes people say the people who want to work from home want a job and the people who want to work back in the office want a career. And that's an interesting challenge to get that balance right, because we'll miss out on what I call funnels of serendipity, how random chance can change your life. We don't have random chance when we're all at home, just hanging around with people that we know. So we miss out on those meetings outside of the meetings, the chance encounters, the way luck and serendipity can influence your life. So I guess we're going to go back to some sort of hybrid there. And I think for companies, they're going to have to try and reintroduce and embrace a culture of networking which is something that they haven't had a lot of experience with. It means that they're going to have to recruit people who are good at networking. They're going to have to train their people to be good at networking. They're going to have to make it a KPI, key performance indicator. They're going to have to reward people. They're going to have to compensate people. They're going to have to open up their offices and locations to bring in diverse sorts of people. They're going to have to develop an alumni organization, a diaspora of people who work for companies. I like the word diaspora and use it in quite a broad sense. I think countries have diasporas, of course. Poland is a great diaspora. We have a great Polish network of people here in Ireland. But I think companies have diasporas. That's interesting. I think sports teams have diasporas. I think that's interesting. When you think about companies, the company in the world that has the best diaspora is actually McKinsey. 30,000 people who used to work for McKinsey have left the company because if you don't make partner, you must leave. But McKinsey have built this incredible network of people around the world that they connect with all the time. So as Kuba mentioned, I'm fascinated by the world of diaspora. I've spent a long part of my life working with the Irish diaspora. Now I'm working with lots of other countries. And just the sheer size of the numbers of people who are living outside the country they were born in. I mean, diaspora is two Greek words, dia meaning over, spiro meaning scattering, first used by reference to the exile of the Jews in Babylon in the 5th century. And now it's used by over 100 countries have diaspora strategies. And you've got cities, you've got regions, you've got villages and towns, because diaspora is all about place, not just about a country. But the sheer numbers, in 1990, there was 150 million people living outside the country they were born in. Now that's 280 million people. Technology and communications are kind of changing everything. These people are connecting, like so many of you, instantaneously, constantly. You're in touch immediately with what's going on back in Poland. And you can live what we call a transnational life, or what we sometimes call a hyphenated life. You can be American and Polish, British and Polish, Australian and Polish, because that's new to the extent that in the old days, your identity was determined by your geography. If you lived in Southern California, that's who you were. And you didn't have any opportunities to get away from that because you were there. But now we say geography is history. Now you can be here and there. It no longer dictates exactly who you are. That's opening up an interesting new potential. And also countries now are realizing that there's a difference between the state, which is kind of lines on the map, and the nation, which is a global notion. So, in our case in Ireland, we're a small little island off the edge of Europe. We're a small, insignificant little place. But we're a massive global empire because, so many people emigrated from Ireland that they've become this extraordinary network around the world. And so we see ourselves as one of the great kind of tribes of the world. And that distinction between the state and the nation is an interesting notion. And that because of technology, what were once, as we say, lost actors can now become national assets. And that's the way we look at this sort of stuff. And diasporas, are very engaged and very committed. And when you think about business, it's extraordinary how, they have a high commitment. They have a high threshold of putting up with challenges and difficulties, which is why they're willing to go back and to invest back in their home country. They have knowledge and expertise locally and globally. They often have financial resources, and they have networks of what we call A&I, affluence and influence. I worked for 10 years for the Irish government agency called IDA Ireland, whose job was to bring inward investment into Ireland. And let me just share one quick story with you. When Intel were coming to Europe, they said they decided to look at 6 countries. Then they decided to go to Scotland, not to come to Ireland. And they said to us in the IDA, we're going to Scotland because they have more electronic engineers, they have a bigger domestic market, so we're going to Scotland. We're going to locate our European headquarters in Scotland. We went away, we hired a recruitment company, did some research, and we discovered 1,000 Irish electronic engineers in the Irish diaspora, none of them living in Ireland, all of them working for Nixdorf, Siemens, Motorola, Nokia, all around the world. We spoke to these people, and 80% said, if Intel come to Ireland, we will come back to Ireland. And that's what happened. We told Intel, we presented the research. Intel decided not to go to Scotland. They came to Ireland, And the rest, as they say, is history. They invested billions in Ireland. They've thousands working in Ireland. They export enormously. They pay taxes to the Irish Taxation Authority. And that decision was on a knife edge. So one of the things I learned about networks and networking is that life is a game of inches. The difference between success and failure, winning and losing, we see it in sport all the time. It's absolutely minuscule. And one tiny little thing can make a difference, can shift something in your direction. And that small little thing about the availability of people in our diaspora was what determined Intel to locate in Ireland and not go to Scotland. That industry, the wafer industry, the chip industry, never developed in Scotland, is now a big industry in Ireland. So I just always was a fan of that idea, you know, life is a game of inches. The other reason why I think networking is so important is because one introduction, one conversation can change your life. But that doesn't happen lying in bed or sitting at your desk. It happens when you're in motion, you're out and about, when you put your talents on display, when you talk to strangers. And that's an interesting challenge in network, is this whole concept of talking to strangers. You know, what do we teach our kids from a young age? We say to them, don't talk to strangers. And yet, you know, our kids statistically are at more danger from friends and family than they are from strangers. So what is networking in essence? Networking is developing long-term hearts and minds, sustainable relationships. You all kind of know that. But here's what's interesting. Networking is all about giving, not getting. Most people think networking is, I need a job, I need a sale, so I'm going to network. But actually, no. Network is the exact opposite. Networking is what can you give to other people based on a simple idea. The more you give to people on a consistent basis, the more it'll come back to you from your network. So it's all about giving. Essentially, networking is about three things. It's about being relationship driven rather than just transaction driven. It's about altering your behavior, and behavior change is about the hardest thing in the world. And it's about doing stuff, little small stuff every day. Networking is not about any one big thing. It's about a whole series of small things, which if you do them on a daily, consistent basis, they become habits, they become rituals, and they become part of who you are as a person. So I can't talk about networking without reference to the virus raging out of control, economies decimated, millions dead, incredible impact. People are weary and wary of the virus. And the year is 1918. And the Spanish flu has the world by its throat and is devastating the economies and societies. And yet 500 million people were infected. 50 million people died of the Spanish flu. And despite that, the Spanish flu was followed by an extraordinary period of innovation, creativity, and growth. It led on in the United States to what we call the Roaring 20s. It was an extraordinary period. You know, we had the emergence of building of millions of motor cars, which meant highways had to be built. We had massive investment in hotels, in sports stadia. We had the radio informing the masses. We had the movies entertaining the masses. It was an extraordinary period that happened. And I believe that now, 100 plus years later, we're going to go into something similar. This period of COVID-19, when we eventually get out of it, I think it's going to be followed by an enormous period of growth and innovation, driven by the same two things that drove back in 1918, technology and pent-up capital, which is in such amount in the world right now. Technology back then was cars, electrification. Today, it'll be 5G broadband. It'll be the green economy. And so the message I always say to people now is don't get down, get ready. We have an old Irish expression that says, when business is down, that's when you paint the shop. And the interesting thing about this period, and I'll be very honest with all of you, I'm struggling a bit in this period. I'm really fed up of not being able to network the traditional way. But there've been some pluses. What we're doing today, you probably wouldn't have done this a couple of years ago. We're now speaking to people in a whole series of different countries around the world. So by embracing technology, by using webinars, we're not restricted geographically. We can connect with anybody, anywhere in the world, and for free. And in my business, free is a very compelling price point. I kind of like free as a compelling price point. We're not wasting time and energy and carbon footprint and money and grooming time, flying all around the place to have meetings and nothing ever happens. And people are available. I always get calls these days. People say, are you available next week? Of course I'm available next week. I can't go anywhere. So people are available, and more people are spending more time online than ever before in history, which is fantastic. So you can know where you can get them. And because of LinkedIn, and by the way, I hope everybody today will connect with me on LinkedIn on my profile, because I'm building up that and I'd really love people to connect with me. So please do that. But because of LinkedIn, 750 million people in the world have told this company, here's my education details, here's my academic qualifications, my experience of work, here's my hobbies. You can have it, and you can have it for free. So now we know where people are. We can find out a lot about them. It's free. I mean, this is incredible. So we're opening up now really hundreds and hundreds of thousands of opportunities. At the same time, there's hundreds of thousands of competition, very often in very competitive places. And so I think that's a really fantastic thing, that we can all now develop an entirely new, if you like, tribe of people around the world who can be part of a new network. And I don't think we're going to go back, but when we go on to whatever the next phase of the way we work, educate, live, holiday, travel, whatever that looks like, we're going to have our existing network of connections, and now we have a new network, which means I think it's a kind of a plus win-win. But the reality of life is you can't go it alone. The myth of individualism is sometimes out there, that life and progress is all about, the individual, the rugged individual taking on the world and winning. It's not. It's about collaboration. It's about cooperation. It's about connecting with other people. Opportunities don't float around on clouds. They're attached to people. If you're looking for an opportunity, you're really looking for a person. And what's interesting is that networking, we know, is helpful to get business and find investors and customers and all that good stuff. But the reason I'm so interested in it is because all the research shows that people who have strong and diverse networks live longer, are stronger mentally and physically, earn more money, and are happier. Kind of like all of those. It's also the antidote to the great crisis of our times, which is loneliness. So I think there's all those pluses on it. And your network is portable. You made it, you built it. When you go, it goes with you. And what's interesting is now companies want to hire and wire. Companies want to hire people and wire into their network. So when you're being interviewed for a job, companies want to know about your qualifications and your work experience, but they want to know something else. They want to know who you know, because we live in a world where it's not what you know. It's not even who you know. It's who knows you. But one of the struggles we have, and one of the reasons why building a strong and diverse network is really important, is a concept we call homophily, which is kind of a fancy Greek word. And homophily means the sense of that we tend to hang around with people just like us. Birds of a feather flock together. But the world we're now operating in is extremely diverse. So I live in a city where 30% of the people working in Dublin are not from Ireland. So it's an extremely diverse city. And the question is, does your network reflect the diversity of the city you live in, the company you work for, the economy that you operate in? And for many people, that's not the case. So your network is a wonderful form of networking intelligence, finding out what's going on outside. There is this notion that there's more smart people outside your company than inside your company. So you as a company can use the people who work for you as a form of intelligence as to what's happening in the sector and the segment around the world. And in every relationship with everybody, it's important that you remember three things in every conversation which you have with them. The first question is, what can I do for you? Not the opposite. What can you do for me? The second question is if you were me, what would you do? And you're paying respect and deference to wisdom and experience. You're listening and you're getting advice. People love giving advice, and you're listening, which is the key skill in networking. And then the final question, the gold dust question in networking, which is, who do you know who? Who do you know who works in Gdansk? Who do you know who lives in New York? Works in insurance, in tourism? And what you're really saying is, are you willing to put your reputation and name and trust on the line for me and to make an introduction? Because an introduction is like having a passport at a border. So I guess what I'm trying to say this morning to finish is that really what you're trying to do is to replace cold calls with hot coffees. And if you do that, then network is going to work for you. It's going to work for you. It's going to work for the Polish diaspora around the world. So Kuba, I'm conscious that you have a big program today and a lot of time. So I'm just going to hand back to you now if I'm okay on time.
Absolutely. Just one last thing I wanted to share with all of you, because you have the program where you can upskill in networking in the diaspora engagement. But can I just say one thing? As you offer more or less theory, we offer today practice. So please do network with each other, because that's the very point of this meeting. I just have one last question, if I can ask. Let me just see. Yeah, I just stopped sharing screen. Last question, because you're working with different diasporas all over the world, would you give any advice to Polish diaspora? I believe that we are not anyway special, because every diaspora is about engagement and about sharing knowledge. But would you give any comment, any advice in this?
Yeah, I've worked with over 30 countries now, and I'm a founder member of an organization called CASE, and CASE stands for Copy and Steal Everything. In other words, figure out who's doing this well. So I think one of the interesting things is to look at the countries who are doing this stuff really well, figure out which bits of that would work for Poland. Now, the leading country historically has been Israel, very strong in that. India now are the country who are doing an enormous amount. India, at one level, you could say one of the poorest countries in the world, has the most successful diaspora in the United States. Indians now run companies like Google and Microsoft and Pepsi. I mean, it's incredible. And India now is really galvanizing and connecting with these people and building these networks, which is really powerful. So I would say the tip would be to audit what everybody else is doing, figure out which bits may work for you, and then put them in place.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time. That was a pleasure to welcome you here. So just some housekeeping rules. What's going to happen right now, I will have a very, very short break, so don't go anywhere, of around 1 minute, and straight after, as we know why it is worth engaging in your own diaspora, we're going to discuss some practical examples of how does it look like all over the world with speakers from Australia, from the US, from Germany, from the UK, from Poland. So we're going to have a very interesting discussion. So Kingsley, thank you very much for your time, and I will see you very, very shortly.
Thanks, Kuba. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.